design, which, given God's design of the idea of smallpox in the first place, presumably inoculation is an interference with that design, Jefferson managed to find a way of conveying the vaccine from state to state without it going sour, as it were, without losing its potency, by keeping it chilled. He helped to teach Lewis and Clark on their expedition crossing the United States, discovering its new boundaries, how to apply these inoculations when they met Indian peoples. He taught them cartography, taught them astronomy and navigation in every sense, could have taught them if he'd wanted to, quite a bit about agriculture, viniculture, and the law of the sea. When there was a question of a treatise on whaling, Mr. Jefferson wrote an account of the problem himself, just to establish what was known or not knowable about these things. It was a time when the frontiers of knowledge were considered to be almost contiguous with the frontiers of liberty. I suppose that's one definition of the Enlightenment, the belief that knowledge is power, and powerfully exemplified in the life of Philadelphia at that time. And this extraordinary coincidence of men and ideas at one moment leads to the seizing of an opportunity to declare independence from the hated Hanoverian crown and to establish for the first time, and this is my second point in a way, the first ever and still the first and only republic in human history that explicitly separates the church and the state, that says in terms, in written documents, that remain a work in progress, subject to revision and amendment, and thus make this the great subject for any writer, the American Republic, that the word God has no place in official discourse. The American Constitution does not mention the word God at any point. It deliberately excludes it, except when mentioning the necessity of separating religion from politics. And when God is mentioned platonically, so to speak, or maybe neo-platonically, in documents like the Declaration, he's evoked by those who consider themselves to be deists, in other words, those who do not believe that God intervenes in human affairs, of whom Jefferson, if he wasn't an atheist, which I think he probably was, certainly was, a deist, a Unitarian, one who did not believe in divine intervention. So a prize almost beyond all value or computation, that at last the world of European theocracy, the divine right of kings, the endless tyranny over the mind has been smashed and broken in a country that has a fair chance of growing, of becoming a nation, of ceasing to be what it was at the time of the Revolution. Roughly, that's to say the equivalent to North America of what Chile now is to South America. That's to say a long ribbon of territory between the mountains and the sea on the coast, and to become a continental republic. It becomes that principally because, again I'm condensing, of the bravery of the Haitian Revolution. The ideas of the French Revolution inspire a slave rebellion in Haiti, led by the first real slave general of genius since Spartacus, Toussaint Louverture, who takes the ideas of liberté, égalité, fraternité, and turns them on the French Empire, destroys a French army, destroys a French fleet, raises the standard of the first black republic in the hemisphere, and forces Bonaparte to sell not just the town of New Orleans, but the whole of Louisiana and beyond, doubling the size of the United States in one day, to Thomas Jefferson, oddly enough on the 4th of July, 1801. So that when the Lewis and Clark expedition sets out to prospect the interior and look for a frontier in California, they're able to tell the Indian peoples with whom they meet that they already live in the United States, and that the reign of British and French and Spanish crowns in North America is over forever. An extraordinary lifetime, and I've only dwelt on a little bit of it, but shadowed all of it, every bit of it, every single bit of it, by the taint of slavery, which, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, is very much in our atmosphere this year, with the anniversary of Mr. Wilberforce's triumph. It's even present actually in the idea of the Enlightenment and the struggle to apply knowledge and technique to liberation, because it turns out that not all devices are liberating, not all technology is labor-saving after all. The cotton gin, Mr. Whitney's great invention, it turns out prolongs slavery, makes it more profitable for many more years. So even the ideas of new machinery can be made into weapons of alienation against people whose labor is extracted from them by force, people who are owned as property. So even in the Enlightenment vision, there's a negation. It has to be said that the same is true of the expansion of the country. When Thomas Jefferson bought Louisiana and doubled the size of the country, Thomas Paine came to him, and Joel Barlow came to him, and many other of his old Philadelphia comrades came to him and said, we can start again, we can start anew, we can start without the original sin of the country, we can start without the stain of slavery, which in the Constitution had defined an African as worth 3/5 of a human being for voting purposes. We can begin again without slavery, again because of the influence this time of the sugar interest Jefferson needed or felt he needed to continue the institution of slavery and to expand it into the new territories. And so it shadows even this moment of the liberation of the rest of the continent and actually bodies forth the likelihood of civil war, because the new states cloned from Louisiana are going to equalize with the number of free states in time. And once the Union is half slave and half free, there can only be one issue, which, alas, Mr. Jefferson passes on to his descendants and to Mr. Lincoln to solve. Mr. Lincoln being born, by the way, Abraham Lincoln, on the very same day of the very same month of the very same year as Charles Darwin. Mr. Darwin is just out of sight of Mr. Jefferson when he prospects in Virginia and looks at the topography and wonders how it is the shells are quite as high as they are on the mountaintop. Can't yet quite work out why it is. He can go no further than deism in his rejection of divine intervention, just on the cusp of the Enlightenment that will show to humans that ethics and politics and life is possible without God altogether. And it also shadows his foreign policy, because in fact he would have put down that Haitian rebellion, the very one that liberated not just Haiti, but the southern states of America, if he could, because he was so afraid that the example of Haiti would spread to Virginia and Georgia and the Carolinas. But, and here I'm going to try and meld and mesh myself with Comrade Cohen, but Mr. Jefferson is prepared to do one thing, and it's the following. In North Africa, what were vulgarly called the Barbary states at the time, that's to say the North African member states of the Ottoman Empire, today's Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco, we estimate, Linda Colley's book, Captives, is one of the best resources for you to read here if you wish, between, say, about 1650 and about 1830, approximately 1.75 million European and Americans were captured, kidnapped on the high seas by the navies of the Ottoman Empire and taken into slavery. It extended quite a long way. It wasn't just guarding the Straits of Gibraltar and the Pillars of Hercules, the approaches to the Atlantic, and taking ships and their crews, though that was done very often, and their passengers. But raids as far north as the town of Baltimore in Ireland, the whole of whose population was carried off in one night into slavery by Muslim slavers in the late 17th century, and many towns in Devon and Cornwall, as far north as Iceland, this trade, shameful trade, went on. And it started to attack the United States as well as soon as it became independent. And Mr. Jefferson went to see the ambassador of Barbary in London, he himself at the time being ambassador in Paris. He went with John Adams. He said, by what right do you do this to Americans, American ships, people, civilians? By what right do you take them and imprison them and enslave them? The United States has no quarrel with you. We've signed a treaty with Tripoli saying we're not a Christian country. We took no part in the Crusades. We took no part in the Reconquista, the reconquest of Andalusia. We've never been and are not your enemy. And the ambassador Abdurrahman replied to him in London, in Grosvenor Square, said, our Quran gives us the right to do it. The Quran gives us the right to make slaves of any infidel who doesn't recognize the rule of our prophet and the rule of our empire, and to demand tribute from them if we are so generous as to withhold this policy, is to refrain from it. And at this point, Mr. Jefferson decided that means war. The existence of this policy is incompatible with the existence of the United States. A navy will be built, a Marine Corps will be founded, we will send a fleet, we will put down this trade. And we will not just put down the slave trade, but we will force a passage through Gibraltar, allowing free trade for every other country between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. That is the birth of America as a superpower. The very thing that every liberal considers to be the most degraded kind of imperialism now. The very triumph, in other words, of Enlightenment ideas and free trade ideas in combination that gives rise to the idea of Jeffersonian, as we call it, democracy. Not very many people have their names coterminous with democracy, have a democracy named for them. Mr. Jefferson is one. We should all be so lucky. So I just wanted to make this point among others and to say that my investigations into this argument, and also to my companion book on this, on the American founding and on the original ideas of 1776 and the American Revolution, suggest very powerfully and very strongly to me that the American Revolution is the only revolution left standing. To round off what Nick has said about the ultimate discredit or exhaustion or implosion or negation of the Chinese Revolution of 1948, the Soviet Revolution of 1917, the Cuban Revolution, now in its final parodic stages of decay, the investments in illusory utopia in which so many of the left have put their trust in the past, and the way in which men like George Galloway, now looking still for a fatherland of totalitarianism that they can adopt, now say openly what I suspected them of thinking. They now say openly, well, the proletariat may have died out on us, but we still have Islam as the revolutionary force, the force that opposes the bourgeoisie, opposes imperialism and capitalism. Get ready for this to be the prevailing illusion. Well, it will be combated by the only democratic and humanist revolution that still has validity, that still could be a model for other countries in the separation of church and state, a written constitution, a separation of powers, and a free market. There are not many countries I can think of that don't have those things, that would not be better off with them, including our own, still ludicrously run by a monarchy that is the head of the church as well as the head of the state and the armed forces. Could anything be more ludicrous than that? And whose slobbering, chinless Dauphin has told us that he wishes to be the head of the Muslim worshippers in this country as well as the deluded Anglicans who follow his reign. That's what it's like to come back to England for me, to find all that still going on and getting worse. Well, need I say more? You've been warned. You've seen what anti-Americanism leads to. It leads to the worship of what I wouldn't hesitate to call fascism. It leads to a masochistic attitude to our own democracy and our own civilization. It leads to an over-privileging of the most dismal, reactionary, and backward ideas of all, the ideas of religion. Thank you.